to something else, and this is the war on corruption. And we do know that there is quite a number of cases that has UK involved in Kenya. And your predecessor, Robert Mackay, who was the ambassador between 2008 and 2011, was very clear and said that the UK was going to help Kenya in fighting corruption, even if it means having some of the assets and monies that are stashed in the UK brought back. How are we doing on that so far?
I think we're making some progress, and I would agree with Rob. This is a really important problem in all of our societies, and I really welcome the President's personal commitment to tackling corruption. I think it's one way of seeing this is a tax on ordinary hard-working people. If you're trying to get a job, make a better living for your family, build a business, corruption is creaming off some of that. It's holding countries back, it's limiting their potential. And I think there's a clear vision now from the top here about why it needs to be tackled. You mentioned the UK link, so there are a number of cases. Some of them are still going through the courts, and I can't therefore talk about them in detail. But on Chickengate, for example, the two British gentlemen, I think it was, who
for Smith and Osman,
from Smith and Usman, who were giving bribes, they have been found guilty in a British court. They have been fined, and we are now working with Cabinet Secretary Rotich, with others in the Kenyan system, to bring the money that they were fined back into Kenya and to use it for the benefit of the Kenyan people. So to build some development projects with it, or find some other specific use for it. There was a case in Jersey. The two gentlemen that are accused in that case are still here in Kenya. We're seeking their extradition to Jersey. We're working very closely with the Kenyan authorities on that, but the gentlemen are contesting it in the Kenyan courts. But the company, Windward Trading, has already pleaded guilty to money laundering. It has surrendered, I think, about
Is that a UK company?
It's a UK company. It's a company established in Jersey, which is a sort of special part of the UK with special tax status. But the Jersey authorities have been out here. We've worked with them, and I think there's about $5 million. So what's that? 500 million shillings, which they have given up as surrendered assets. Again, we're working with the Kenyan authorities to bring that money back to Kenya to use it for the benefit of the Kenyan people.
Would you say so far the government has been cooperative in ensuring that that money comes back, or also the conviction of those who might be found guilty?
Absolutely. I would say, I mean, no government controls its courts. So I think it would be unfair, either in the UK or in Kenya, to hold the government responsible for things that are still going through the courts. And there are some frustrations in both of our countries where cases have been brought to trial but are dragging on. We've already mentioned one where things are being contested and slowed down in the courts. But that's an important process, right? That's why we have a judicial process, so that people can be
has to go through the legal system,
and, found guilty or not found guilty. And I can't intervene in that. That's an independent set of processes. But where there have been rulings by courts, and I've mentioned a couple, Smith and Usman and the Jersey cases, then absolutely we're working with the government to get that money back to Kenya. And when there is questions prior to trial, so for example, some of these cases where there's evidence in the UK, we have a very slick system now, and I talk to the Attorney General about it regularly, where we get the evidence from the UK, we bring people over, expert investigators, they sit down with the Kenyan authorities, they work things through. Okay, you've got this piece of paper, we've got that bit, how do they match up? I think we're learning quite a lot about how to work together on that, and I'm hopeful in the next year we'll make even more progress.
One might argue that given the number of cases that we have in Kenya, linked to the UK with companies that are shady companies, so to speak, why do you think that UK is somewhat a soft spot for these criminals to possibly engage with these companies there? Is it the laws that are too lax?
I wouldn't say the UK is a soft spot. I would say the UK is actually one of the hardest and most stringent sets of anti-bribery legislation anywhere. And the reason that the Smith and Usman defendants were convicted in the UK,
even if the case is not yet finished here in Kenya, is that the giving of bribes is a specific offence under UK law. And even before you've tied up exactly how that panned out here in Kenya, those people can be convicted under the Bribery Act in the UK. That's extremely stringent. I can't, even if I were to bring you a bottle of wine to say thank you for giving me this interview, I would have to fill in a register and declare that I'd done it, and if you were to give me one, you might have to make sure that it was...
so there's a system that is very stringent.
It's a very, very fair and very strict system that is imposed. I think sometimes that means that British cases have a bit more visibility, because maybe these things go unnoticed or unprosecuted in other jurisdictions. I think to answer your other question, maybe some of this. I mean, I talked about connection earlier. I think that's largely to the good. But the fact that our societies are interwoven means, yes, criminality and corruption and other things are sometimes interwoven too, in the sense that our businesses are doing so much business with each other, where there's a very small proportion of them that are corrupt. Maybe that affects UK, Kenya more than it affects another country that Kenya has less to do with.
Okay.
But what's good, as I say, is that the legal systems are much more meshed together, that our police are working really closely together. We have people now coming out from our Crown Prosecution Service, so what your equivalent of the Department of Public Prosecutions, who sit down with Kenyan prosecutors, work through, okay, how are we going to prosecute these cases on either side of the divide, if you like. And I think we can get a lot more out of that.
Would you say that the war on corruption in the UK is successful?
I don't think any society would say that the war on corruption has been entirely successful. I think the UK does pretty well on those international indices where countries are ranked, but of course there are still problems. There are still cases that come to light. No society is perfect.
Okay. And maybe on a weighing scale, looking at Kenya and UK, where would you say possibly Kenya is going wrong when it comes to the war on corruption? I mean, we have Smith and Osman, who obviously and evidently have been found guilty of having given money to somebody. But on Kenya, we're still waiting for, it's still sort of mystical as to who received this money. Where do you think we're going wrong?
I don't think you're going wrong. I think what needs to happen, if I'm asked for my advice, is the different bits of the system need to coordinate with each other. And that, I think, has also been the biggest struggle in the UK, because we both have complicated systems. We've got police that investigate things, we've got, in some cases, anti-corruption authorities with special responsibilities, we've got courts, we've got prosecutors. All of those are different parts of the system. And one of the big challenges for us has been in the UK to join all of those up so that everyone understands what is needed at different parts of the process. So by the time the judge is sitting in the trial, he or she understands what the police have investigated, has the technical knowledge to understand the detailed reports that the police have produced, or the prosecutor has the knowledge to understand how to take all of this information in these large files and turn it into a legal case. So that joining up of the system is, I think, something that that needs to happen more, both in the UK and here in Kenya. And it's something we're working on. So we now, rather than just bringing out trainers to look at different bits of the Kenyan system, we train everyone together. We bring judges and policemen and prosecutors into the same room with people from different parts of the UK government, and we say, okay, let's talk about how that system works from end to end.
Okay. All right. I'd like to leave some time for your questions. So if you have any questions, this is the time to send them through. I'll come to them very, very shortly. But there's also in the grapevine, we've heard that the Prime Minister for the UK, David Cameron, will be visiting Kenya. Maybe you could confirm that for us. Sorry.
Well, as soon as I have any news on that, I'll be the first to let you know. But at the moment, I can't confirm that. I know Prime Minister would love to come here, but at the moment, the big thing in the UK is this European referendum. So I suspect if we are able to plan such a visit, it will come after that. And obviously, as soon as we can say something, we'll let you know.
Okay. So far, do we treat that as a rumor? Do we treat it? How do we treat that information?
I think you'll have to...
As unofficial.
The Prime Minister, I've talked to the Prime Minister before I came out here, and I know that he would like to visit Kenya at some point, but I also know that there is no date yet in a diary or plan yet, and one needs to be careful about those things. If one goes around saying, well, this is going to happen, and then it doesn't happen, it suddenly looks like a snub, whereas actually, the Prime Minister's focus at the moment is on getting our relationship with Europe right, getting through this referendum. There's a budget to be announced this week in the UK, so it's an awful lot of domestic preoccupations. And of course, because I'm the Balozi here, not anywhere else, every time I go back to London or I get the Prime Minister's office on the phone, I'm going to keep saying you should come to Kenya at some point. That's the promise I'll make. So
hopefully he'll be coming in. I would like to host him on personal,
I'd love it to happen.
Interest.
I'll recommend it too.
That would be great. And if he comes, of course, then would have wanted to know what the agenda would be. But coming back to the European Union, how do you see that panning out?
Well, the government has a position, which is that we should stay in. I will let my personal position become clear in the voting booth, but when I tell you I've got a French wife, I speak French and German, I studied in France, my kids are half European, well, they're all European, but they're half French. That might give you a clue as to my personal inclination. But there's this debate about our relationship with Europe. It's obvious that there's some very serious issues this raises. As in any country working with its neighbours, there's a question of how much sovereignty you give up, how much you accept regionalising some of the powers you're used to having as a nation state. But the government's taken a clear position, which is that we've renegotiated some of these arrangements. We've got a deal now that we think is even better for the UK, and the government wants us to stay in. So the Prime Minister and most of his cabinet will be campaigning for that. The vote's on June the 23rd. At the moment, the opinion polls, as I read them, show a slight majority for the vote to stay in. But I think there's some way to travel before then, and there's quite a lively debate.
Okay. Let me just take a few of the questions that have come through, and we have one from Imali, who is asking, ask Ambassador Nic Hailey if he will revise the time allotted to wait for UK visas for Kenyan students. Visas, of course, are a big...
I know visas are a big thing.
Yeah, they're a big thing.
And it's really important to us that we get this visa service right, because on the one hand, clearly, just like Kenya, we have a right to decide who enters our country on what terms for how long, and I applied for we have a very good visa system actually, which I applied for online when I came here, but I've got to meet the criteria just as people going to the UK have got to meet the criteria. So that's on the one hand. On the other, sustaining this relationship we have, I've talked a lot about how connected we are, about how much I value the students going to the UK, the businesses that trade with each other. We've got to allow people to travel back and forth. So getting that system right is really important to me. What I would say is we have a system that seems to work pretty well if you bring the right documents, if you come to your appointment with the right materials. But it's a system that's based on very clear criteria, and all those criteria are available on the internet. You can work it out before you come. One of the biggest frustrations is when people come and they haven't prepared themselves properly, then they have to go away and start all over again, and I understand how frustrating that is. But the criteria are very clear. We also have a priority visa service, so for people that really need to travel quickly, they can pay a bit extra. Could be a family emergency, could be a business person that just doesn't want to wait. Now that costs a bit more, but it allows us to process a visa more quickly. If you don't want to pay that extra money, though, the key is to apply well enough in advance. And then if there are any problems, for a student, for example, hopefully you should know quite a long time in advance when you're planning to go, which university you're planning to go to. So make sure you get that application in early, and then you've got the best possible chance of it going through.
Okay, we have a question from Joe here, and he says, hopefully David Cameron will come into the country. Do we see a revision of the visas to the UK hit 5 years like the US? We recently had Barack Obama come, and one of the things that was revised is the minimum period if you qualify for you to go to the US is 5 years. That's if you qualify a multi-entry visa. Would we see that with the UK?
We do have, as I understand it, a system of multi-entry visas, and I think we go at least up to 5 years for some people. That isn't appropriate for everybody. And the charges, one of the things our visa system requires is that we charge the full cost. So the British taxpayer doesn't subsidise our visa system, it's paid for by its fees.
So if it's 5 years, you'd
so
still have to pay the full...
if you're applying for 5 years, you'll be paying a lot more than if you're applying for a shorter term visa, and not everybody needs a 5-year visa. But I believe I'm right, and I will check this later, and I will tweet a correction if I'm wrong, because I don't have all of this in my head
we'll
yet.
Be looking out
but I believe that we offer quite a range of visas, including long-term ones, where that is appropriate. But if you're coming on a short visit, then you're probably better off applying for a shorter one rather than paying the extra.
Okay.
Everything is on our website, so I will direct people there.
And I guess it really matters if you qualify. If you qualify for the 5 years and you can afford it, then you can go for it.
I believe that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. If there's any correction, like you've said, you'll tweet.
I will tweet.
The visa charges, I think we have a lot to do with visas, but the visa charges apparently, according to Nick, is that they are very expensive and restrictive. Your comments on that?
Well, I've just said that the system has to pay for itself. And many countries charge for visas. I think Kenya charges about $50 for a single entry visa. I've just bought a couple of visas for my wife's parents to come and visit us, and I paid by credit card. It worked very well. But the idea of charging is, I know, uncomfortable for some people, but ultimately the system has to be paid for, the staff who administer it have to be paid for. So the charges do reflect that. But we do have this scale of charges. So as I say, if you're prepared to wait a bit longer, it's significantly cheaper than if you need something right away. So the worst thing to do is to wait until the last minute, then come in and then say, oh dear, I need to get the priority service, it's going to cost me an awful lot more.
Yeah.
The key is to think ahead, plan ahead, and apply for the visa that you really need.
Okay.
And of course, if we can keep those charges down, we'll work to do that.
All right. We have Benjin Dolo, who says we warmly welcome the new British High Commissioner.
Thank you.
Tell him we're looking forward to a high tea tomorrow. I don't know if you have an engagement with him, maybe with high tea.
Well, I'll have to check. I can't see your Twitter
You'll check
feed
your
from
diary. We'll ask your colleague Stephen here, who's been very helpful so far, and to see that. Now, as we wind down, as time is running out, it'll be interesting, of course, to know what football team do you support?
Well, I'm a bit embarrassed to answer this question because I support Tottenham Hotspur. And my family has always supported Tottenham Hotspur. My father supported them, his father supported them. They were a North London family. But the reason I say this with some reluctance is that most of Kenya seem to support Arsenal. And those who don't support Arsenal seem to support
Manchester United.
So the other day I was tweeting, because it was the North London derby, Spurs-Arsenal, and I tweeted, "Come on, you Spurs," as a lot of Spurs fans did. And I received some fairly clear messages back. Nairobi is red, Balozi was one of them. Another of them was a few words in Swahili, which when I had them translated,
have you got an interpreter? Maybe go on to Google.
They weren't the most polite words in Swahili. Feelings run pretty deep about this kind of stuff.
Yes.
But I'm hoping that perhaps one of the contributions I can make here is to find a few more Spurs fans around the place.
I'm sure there's some
I don't know
Spurs out there. Manchester United. So we'll agree to disagree on that form. But it's been great having you, Nic Hailey, as our person of interest today. We wish you all the best in Kenya. We're glad that so far you're enjoying yourself. And, we're looking forward to a stronger relationship with the UK.
Thanks very much, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Thank you very much. And that's where we're going to wind up our personal